Okay, shalom everyone. So I spelled Muktzeh in the way that Rabbi Melamed does and others. Some people pronounce it with an A, Muktzeh, and I think also in Hebrew that's how it's written. And so we already saw in the Sefaria and other places that they mean that they write in parentheses, what does this word actually mean? It means to set it aside. So I think the first time that it's written as a verb that people were loathing us, the people of Israel, when the Hebrews were in Egypt. It says "Vayachutzu mipnei bnei Israel," and again, 40 years later, when they're at the plains of Moab, it says the same about the Moabites can't stand the Israelites. But for us, it's not a despicable thing or loathsome or abomination. It's just that we don't want to handle any of these mukta, and we'll see that there's a few categories on Shabbat because they either might be related to a melacha that is forbidden, which we learned in the last 21 chapters, or it's because something that we can't or won't use for anything other than the actual purpose, like a shchita knife. Nobody who's a shochet will allow his family to take the knife for shchita or circumcision and use that for cutting a salad for Shabbat. Why? Not because it's prohibited to cut a salad on Shabbat, because the knife has to be so sharp that we don't want it to be dulled even by such a simple activity. And so Muktzeh for us is a positive thing, but it's to remind us at every point that it is Shabbat. So, for example, if you find a pen on the Shabbos table, we'll learn that you are allowed to move it because you want the Shabbos table to not have stuff like that on it, but nobody will think that you're going to write something or a letter with it on Shabbat because it's very obvious that you're moving it because it's not supposed to be on the table while we're having the Shabbat meal. So the basis of the prohibition is a way of Rabbi Melamed's introduction why we don't have this and why we have the law of Muktzeh, and so let's delve into it. So the sages prohibited moving things that are not fitting for Shabbat and that one puts out of his mind, Muktzeh midato, literally puts out of their mind. There are two fundamental reasons for this prohibition. One, to preserve the atmosphere of Shabbat as a day of holiness and rest, like we saw in chapter 22. The idea of rest applies to one's hands as well. They should not move objects or be involved with activities that are not connected to Shabbat. And two, to set up a safeguard so that one will not come to do melacha on Shabbat, acts of creative labor. We will begin by explaining the first reason. In addition to the melachot that are prohibited on Shabbat, the Torah commands us to rest and relax on Shabbat, as it states, "But on the seventh day you shall cease, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your maidservant and the stranger may be refreshed." Similarly, we read 6 days shall work be done, yes, but on the seventh day there shall be a Shabbat of complete rest, holy to the Lord. So Rabbi Melamed is not saying that Muktzeh is biblical, but these are the verses that the rabbis used to explain why we have to rest on Shabbat. In order to fulfill the Torah commandment to rest and relax on Shabbat, the sages established several ordinances meant to protect the spiritual Shabbat as a day of sanctity and rest. One of them is the prohibition of Muktzeh. And so because it is rabbinical and not biblical, in certain circumstances, like the needs of the community or makom mitzvah, as we saw in some of the halachot in the last few weeks, or because you're in the army and there's a special laws for the camp of the army, even if they're not in actual battle and all that. That's why we're more lenient, because it's not biblical but rabbinical. If moving items unnecessary for Shabbat were permitted, people might well spend all of Shabbat cleaning and arranging their homes and belongings, thus negating the mitzvah to rest. Additionally, the prophets instructed the people that the atmosphere of Shabbat should be different from that of the weekday. One should walk and talk differently. That's from the verse in Isaiah that we saw. Following this line of thought, sages decreed that people should not handle objects and implements on Shabbat in the same way as during the week. Just a reminder, in the last chapter, we learned that we're not allowed to wash pots on Shabbat because they are muktzeh, because you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. But the guests suddenly came and you need more cutlery or more plates or more glasses, you are allowed to wash them. So I think a perfect example of this line of thought. This way, Shabbat is truly felt by all, including those whose weekday activities do not normally involve any forbidden melachot. We see that the prohibition of Muktzeh is rooted in the words of the Torah and the prophets, while its precise parameters and details are rabbinic. So again, what's called asmachta, like that they found a verse that can support it, and there is a few muktzahs that are biblical. We saw an example when we were learning about preparing for Shabbat and preparing on Shabbat, that we're not allowed to, biblically, we're not allowed to take an egg that was laid that day because it's muktzeh, and also, I forget right now what the other example was. As we said, the second reason is so that one will not end up doing melacha on Shabbat. As with all mitzvot, the sages instituted safeguards in order to distance people from sin. And even though what's called mishmeret lemishmarti, the safeguard for the Torah, for observing especially the negative commandments, is mostly the sages, rabbinical. There are even in the Torah fences. So the first fence, maybe the most famous one, is in the Garden of Eden. Eve said that to the snake that Hashem told Adam not to eat from the fruit and also not to touch it. If you look carefully in the words that Hashem spoke to Adam, that is not true. He did not say you shouldn't touch it. It would make sense as a safeguard because we do have such things today, but it's not in the verses. And so one of the rabbis actually says that that's what led to the sin, because the snake proved to her that there's no danger in touching it or punishment. And another famous one was at Mount Sinai itself. Hashem said, do not let the people of Israel touch the mountain. We're not sure why. It's not a commandment forever. It was just for that occasion. And so Moses built a fence, a literal physical fence, and then Hashem tells him, go down and warn them again. And he says, Hashem, excuse me, I already built a fence. Why do I need to go and warn them not to touch it? They're not going to touch it. And he says, never mind, just go back and remind them. So we do have such safeguards even in the Torah. Ramban says that it's biblical to stay away from immoral relationships, and that is also a Torah safeguard. So there's many such examples. And last, the prohibition of muktzeh makes it less likely that people will carry objects in the public domain or use muktzeh items in their own house to perform melacha, like I said about the pen or something else like that. And the prohibition of muktzeh synchronizes the mind and the hands. Any item that one knows is not fit for use on Shabbat will not be touched by his hands either. So again, taking it out of our mind, putting it out, this is, it's not a nether, it's not a piece of forbidden meat, God forbid, but I don't do anything with this pen or anything else like that on Shabbat, because it is Shabbat and I don't want to forget and start doing a melacha with it. And so we'll stop here and we'll continue tomorrow with some principles and also an amazing tie to the parsha. And